好的，央视新闻的网友们，大家上午好。今天是8月15号。
Good morning, dear viewers of China Media Group. Today is August the 15th, the 77th anniversary of Japan's unconditional surrender. We are right now at the Zhejiang Surrender Acceptance Museum in Hunan Province. Today, 77 years ago, Japan announced an additional surrender, and 3 days later, the acceptance site was established here. Now you can see 2 armed police are marching inside with a bunch of flowers to commemorate the unsung heroes. They are paying tribute to a sculpture in the shape of V, and this V represents victory. And the sunflowers inscribed on the V shape represents the persistence and perseverance of the Chinese people. It also marks the important day of the Japanese surrender. Now the flower tribute ceremony is completed, and now they will give a macro lecture.
现在呢是早上的9点07分，我们可以看到我们在前庭有很多我们的受降纪念馆。
It's 9:07 now, and you can see we have some working staff and armed police as well as soldiers from an army, and the audience of 200 people. They are participating in this commemoration activity. And today is Monday. The museum is closed and we have no tourists. And this scene is very grand and serious. And the first part of this ceremony today was the singing of the national anthem. On this very special day, when you hear the national anthem resonate in the atmosphere, you feel nothing but safe and a sense of belonging. Patriotism is part of the Chinese spirit, and for every Chinese, patriotism is our responsibility. It is also our gene. And the second part of the ceremony today was the sounding of the siren. All the participants took off their hats to pay tribute to those victims and unsung heroes. The persistent fight of the unsung heroes were crucial to the victory of the anti-Japanese aggression war, and it demonstrated the heroic characteristics of fighting to the very end. And today we are giving this program live. As you have seen, the two soldiers presenting flowers to this V sculpture, and from the V sculpture, there was an important date, and that is the August 15th, 1945, and that is the date of Japanese surrender. So it was conducted here, so that is why Zhejiang is also well recognized as the site that accepted Japanese surrender. They are giving a micro presentation here in a theme of passing down the greatest spirit and remembering history. All right, this is the end of the speech. The moderator took the stage again. So this is the end of today's brief ceremony here. And we have 40 armed police in today's audience, and many were Generation Z and born after the 1990s. And now you can see the participants are entering the museum, and we want to have a word with one of those participants. Hi. Can we have a brief interview? Yes. My name is Yinping. I'm right now at a forest park in Guiyang, and today is the 77th anniversary of Japan's unconditional surrender. And why we give you this live stream today in a forest park in Guiyang? Well, there is something special to this place because this place is very related to a national treasure. So again, we are now at a forest park, but we have a academy here. It's called the Windland Academy. Windland sounds familiar to all of you because in Hangzhou of Zhejiang there was the Windland Pavilion, which is very famous. So Windland Pavilion is accommodating one of the most important national treasure, and that is the national archives of the country. So we have with us an instructor of this place, Ms. Wu Li. So say hello to our viewers. Good morning. My name is Wu Li. I work at the Windland Pavilion at the forest park in Guiyang. So tell us more about this national treasure. So the Siku Quanshu, or the complete library in the 4 branches of literature, was a great collection of literatures in Kangxi and Qianlong Emperor. And so that was the peak of the feudalism. So this archive was actually a collection of more than 36,000 different literatures throughout the feudal society. And in the past, it was quite difficult to preserve the literatures and books. So that's why Zhang Wanqian believed this is a national treasure, because it has 7 books, and the completion and collection of the books took 14 years. And after completion, they were stored at different places. But in the immediate aftermath of the completion of the books, China entered into a period of humiliation and wars. Among the 7 collections, there were only 3.5 well preserved. One of them is preserved here. Some of the intellectuals in Zhejiang and Jiangsu, they immediately stepped up the plate to well preserve the 4 great collection of archives. So why we call it the national treasure? Is it because of the volume or because of the content? Well, because it's traditional books and it's very difficult to preserve them, and we have only a few of them that have passed down from history. From this, we can see the logic of Chinese culture throughout the feudal society. As you probably know that during the Kangxi and Qianlong period, we were at the end of the feudal society, so it was quite rare for such an archive to be completed. And this one is the largest in size, because over the 40 years of copying, it has actually corrected some of the mistakes in Qing Dynasty, so that is why the collection of archives in Qing Dynasty was of particular importance. But unfortunately, in 1937, the Japanese aggression war broke out, and the intellectuals in Zhejiang, they rushed to the front line of the preservation of this national treasure. And there was this Songhu battle, which is the battle in Shanghai, and on December 24th, Japan conquered Hangzhou, and they searched around the city for this book. And on September 22nd, they established a wartime books committee, and they sent a lot of spies and collected answers to 26 different cultural institutions, but to no avail. So this is a book detailing the history of Japan's search of China's cultural literatures and relics. So this book tells the readers that there was the secret plan of Japan to search and collect those cultural literatures, but they didn't know that in as early as August 14th, 1937, the intellectuals had put these books in storage. And Chen Xunci, the curator of Zhejiang Library, went around different places and found this national treasure. And that was why the successful retreat of the book was made possible. And because of the long journeys of travel, it was partially damaged, and in Zhejiang province, it was shown to some of the visitors at the time. And so this map shows the route of the relocation of the national treasure. So take a look at the map. In Zhejiang, it takes a big S-turn, and you could see that within the province of Zhejiang, it made a lot of trips because of the war, and the long-distance travel of the national treasure was in itself a great danger. So that is why it went to different places, made a lot of detours, and then it traveled all the way to the west. And then, thanks to the protection of the intellectuals in Zhejiang, it traveled 5 provinces, a total of 2,500 kilometers. Eventually, it entered in Guiyang city. At the very beginning, it was kept at the Guizhou Provincial Library. At the time, the conditions were very poor because the library was just established for last 1 year. And then that is why it was relocated to a very center of the ancient town. But before long, the downtown area of Guiyang was bombarded by the Japanese army. And there were a lot of damages. And then one of the staff at the library proposed that we could transfer the book to Dimu Cave, which is where we are right now. All right, thank you very much, Wu Li, for introducing the story for the preservation of this national treasure. So this is the collection of books from the feudal society, because the Kangxian Qianlong period was the peak of the Chinese feudalism. So this collection was actually the collection of all the important literatures throughout the Chinese feudal society. So these are the essence and the best part of the Chinese literature. And we have records showing that the Japanese invaders attempted to collect and take control of this wonderful cultural collection. And later, we will pay a visit to Dimu Cave, and I'm going to hand it over to my colleague. He will give you more introduction as we move to the Dimu Cave. Dear viewers, good morning. My name is Chen Haiqiao with CMG. I'm right now at the ruins of the Chongqing bombardment, and this is the during the 5th incident site, and after renovation, this has been renovated into a history museum. And today, I'm gonna take you on a tour and to pay tribute to the victims and unsung heroes. I have a guide with me who is Jiang Ping. Good morning. My name is Jiang Ping. I'm glad to take you on a tour today. So, Ms. Jiang, you can show us around and tell us the importance of this place. After entering the exhibition hall, what I saw first is this inscription on a wall, and this is very magnificent. So this shows the scene with Chongqing when Chongqing was bombarded by the Japanese, and you can see these 4 characters, which means that the more hardships, the more persistence. So this was actually relocated from a real scene. So, Ms. Jiang, we can see what is the next part. So now we're going to go to the first floor and the second floor, and most of the exhibitions are in the first floor. It shows the background of the history, and it shows some of the real scenes of the bombardment. As I have learned that during the bombing, it was actually a period of 6 years. And so right now in front of me, there are a set of data. So you can take a look at this wall, and from February 18th, 1938 to December 1944, the bombardment lasted 6 years and 10 months. It resulted a total of 32,829 casualties, and that is the direct casualties. And there were also more than 60,000 injured, and the direct economic loss was more than 1.5 billion yuan. So those are just figures, but show us the story behind the figures. So here you can see what is the vivid memory from the time, and we're using the 3D modeling technology to produce some of the real scenes and footages of the bombardments, and you can have an experience of what was the bombardment like.
但同时呢，其实我相信很多不知道网友朋友们了不了解，就是为什么这个重庆在当时会成为这个大轰炸的主要的这个对象。
So why Chongqing was the main target of the bombing? Well, one of the reasons was that Chongqing was the wartime capital of China. It was also the command center of the Far East War against Japanese aggression. And that is why Japan focused its bombardment in this place. And in front of us, we can take a closer look at the June 5th tragedy. I learned that during the tragedy day, the strategy of Japan readjusted. Yes, because Japan made a 102 strategy of bombardment, which means that it will feature a bombardment of 24/7. So by bombing the place 24/7, they want to get the locals exhausted so that they will become less committed to fighting back. So this is the stamp plate showing us the landscape of Chongqing. We have a button here. If you press it, you can see those red lights. Each and every red dot is the place of the bombardment site. And this is where we are right now. And we used to be at one of the centers of the bombardment. So you can see this is the Yizhong district. You can see the city walls and which areas were bombed over the years. So this button, you can mimic the scene of the bombers flying by and above the city, and you can see the different areas being unbombed by the Japanese invaders. It was mainly focused on Yizhong district, which was the old town of Chongqing. At the time, the city was very populous, and you can imagine the casualties. So this is a bomb that we recovered, and this is one of the 2 bombs used by the Japanese invaders. And when that explodes, it could generate a high temperature of 3,000 degrees. And this is the 98/25 bomb, and this one can cover a impact area within a radius of 45 meters. On this side, we have a map. Now you can see the city of Hankou, which is part of Wuhan. In Hankou, they have an airport. So all the bombers, they took off from Wuhan and they flew all the way here to Chongqing and conducted a continuous, non-stop bombing. So this is their bombing route. Under such intense bombing, the civil defense system came into existence. So this footage introduces the scene when the locals built the civil defense holes and grottos. From the end of 1937, the construction started, and as of February 1942, the locals built a total of 2,600 meters long of civil defense holes. You can see that people were carrying the earth and digging using their soil, using their bare hands. So this is the map of the tunnel. And so where are we right now? We are actually here in Yanwu, and this is my responsibility area. It used to be the largest public civil defense tunnel. You can see that it also extends to the Jiaochangkou tunnel. So this put together is the largest public civil defense tunnel in Yuzhong district. So from here, you can actually experience what it was like hiding in this tunnel. And you can come close. So this gives you a scene of the environment of the tunnel, what it was like living in it when the bombers were flying above the sky. And you can see we have ventilation holes just to guarantee air circulation. We have seats, we have lights, and this is to ensure that the local residents could stay here longer. And after this, we're going to enter the second floor in the basement. And those were actually using the real scene as the basis. So, Ms. Jiang, we're going to get one floor downstairs to see what it was like back in the 1930s and 40s. At the time to get into the tunnel, you need to show your certificates, and you also need to indicate the signal. So if we have, for example, one lantern, it means that the bomber had taken off. And when we had two, it means that the bomber is about to fly here. And when the three lanterns were hoisted, it means that the bombing had already taken place. So this exhibits are showing the footages and sceneries of the 1942 bombing. And these pictures show the real scenes of the tragedy. And you can see that they bombed Chongqing in 3 batches during night. But prior to this tragedy day, they used to bomb just in the day, so people were at ease during night. So when a night bombing took place, no one was prepared. So and that's why the great casualty, a huge number of people just swam into this tunnel. But because of the lack of oxygen, many people rushed to the exit of the tunnel. And because the huge number of people, there was this stampede accident. And now you can see some visitors presenting flowers to those victims. And later we're going to present our flowers to just show our tribute to those victims. So this is one small tribute to those victims. So we're standing in front of history. We are commemorating our fellow compatriots. We are going back to those hardship days and to the tragic memory. And from this, you could see And you could feel how difficult victory was won, and I learned that we have gone through real hardships and tragedies, but the Chinese people remained resilient. And here at this part, it shows how tough the Chongqing people were fighting back. And you can see how the reconstruction was initiated, and they actually moved a lot of the factory plants to this tunnel. They continued with the production. So this is a civil defense system. We have civil defense tunnels, and we also have factory plants and schools. And from here, you could feel the hardship of the old days, but despite of the hardships, no one gave up. And people engaged in various means to protect themselves, to rescue others in need, and also to reconstruct our home. So now we are going to enter the next floor to see how the real scene was like. So we're going to walk downstairs to see the real and tangible part of the tunnel. We are going down. So at that time, how deep was the tunnel? The tunnel was built in the end of 1938. It was dug manually, and it had the depth of 10 meters. And this part of the stairway there that we are walking on, this is not the real tunnel back in the 1930s, but we had some slogans representing on the wall. This is just to give you some real feelings. So this is the entrance of the tunnel. Yes. So after passing this gate, we are truly entering the tragedy scene of the June the 5th incident. So there are some rules written on a wooden board. Those were the real regulations back at the time. So now we are walking into history, traveling back in time into the 1930s. And on both sides of the wall, we have recovered some sculptures showing how the people were living in this tunnel. Inside the tunnel, we have many different functional zones. And those are the ordinary people hiding from the bombardment. And we also have volunteers and staff of the tunnel. And take a look at this figure. So you can see that he is ushering people in. You can tell that from his facial expressions. Well, entering here, I could hear a lot of sound. I could hear the siren, and I could hear the yelling and shouting of people. Yes, this is the sound effect that we have reconstructed just to give people an immersive feeling what it was like back in the 1930s. Now take a look at this one. This is the ancient design of the grotto. And you can see there are the white patterns on the wall. And you could see that actually the original tunnel was much bigger. So you can touch these stones. So this is quite different from the renovated part of the exhibition. So we are now walking at the real and original tunnel, and we are touching history. We try to imagine how difficult and how desperate people must be walking into this tunnel. And there's a big sound in front of us, and what is that? So we recovered a documentary, and you could see what it was like when people rushed in this air defense tunnel. This a documentary that we reproduced from some movie footages, and from this you can see vividly how difficult it was at the time and how desperate the tragedy was and how cruel the bombardment was. And there are visitors watching this documentary, they are sitting on a bench silently. And through this, I believe we can feel how difficult the final victory was won. And also on both sides of the screen, we have a platform which can accommodate those electronic candles. And this is another way to show our tribute. So what are those lights above our heads? So these are more lanterns. It's another way to commemorate those victims, and the blinking just like one star after another. Each and every one of them represent tens of thousands of lives lost. And we feel appalled, and we feel saddened by this part of the history. And I believe with this modern technology, we can understand and see the history better. So this is the exit of the tunnel. And we will walk up the stairs and to the real tragic scene of the stampede. And you can see on our right hand, we have some sculptures reproducing the scene, and people rushing to the exit because there is a lack of oxygen in the tunnel. And this is the June the 5th tragedy. So this is very good design. You can see we have sculptures on the right side, and we have on the left side some handrails and some modern technology. And thank you very much, Ms. Jiang, for bringing back to me and to our viewers this part of the history, and we paid our tribute to those victims, and we remembered deep in our heart the hardship days. And I hope and I believe that today's live program has brought you closer to those hardest days and to those days of humiliation. And with the tools of technology, we have seen history in a more vivid manner. And we are paying tribute to those victims and unsung heroes. And with this, we can remember history better.
Hello, 各位央视新闻的网友，欢迎大家回到贵阳。我们现在呢依然是在贵阳鹿冲关森林。
Welcome back to Guiyang. We are right now at the Forest Park. In the first part of our program, I mentioned one national treasure of our nation. There used to be 3 sets of collections, but three collections and half were ruined. But the remaining part of the collection was kept at the Windland Pavilion in Zhejiang. And because this is the most complete version of the collection, it has the hand-copied some of the ruined ones and the wrongly recorded ones. And because of the waging of the Japanese aggression war in 1937, a lot of the intellectuals rushed to the front to engage in preservation and protection of the national treasure, and they eventually moved this to a grotto in Guiyang. And we are right now at the entrance of this grotto, and you can take a look at this scene. And this is called the Dimu cave or Dim grotto. You can see this is very strange in terms of landscape. We have a bump at the entrance. So this is just like the year of a cat. So we now show you an aerial footage of the landscape of this place. So this is just like a very large forest, and right at the center is the grotto. From the aerial footage, you wouldn't discover this place. So I believe that the intellectuals made a right choice, because the Japanese bombers and fighter jets, they wouldn't discover this place when they are flying in the air. And the cave is naturally a great tunnel for civil defense purposes. It was 80 years ago that the ancient intellectuals put these books in it. But after that, how did the people afterwards recover this treasure? And now we have with us Liao Yuesheng to tell us more about this part of the history. So how did you relate this to the national treasure? How did you find this ancient treasure? So it was a mystery at the time, and we didn't know that it was accommodating the four greatest collection of Chinese literatures. And there were rumors, but we don't have any clue. We actually consulted a lot of experts, and we searched a lot of the archives and records, and then we were certain that this was the place that accommodated this national treasure. And now on our screen, I believe you can see this ancient photo, and you can see that they are identical, and this is exactly where we are right now. So from the photo, you can see, and this is when the national treasure was rediscovered. On April the 8th, 1939, the national treasure was relocated here because Guiyang was devastated by a bombardment of Japan, and the bombardment focused on the downtown area. So then we transferred the book to Zhangjiang Pond. So Zhangjiang Pond to here is just like less than 1 kilometer. To ensure the highest level of safety, we just relocated the books here. At the time, one of the staff knew that there was a grotto in this place, so the cultural intellectuals and experts, they paid a few visits here, and they believe there are 3 favorable conditions. Number 1, this is very naturally a great place for air defense. And there is a concave place, so when we put the books here, fighter jets, they wouldn't see that. And the second advantage is that it's very spacious inside. Another reason is that the cave is facing west. In the afternoon, the sunshine could come in. So this is very good for the preservation of the books. So that is why we decided to relocate the books here. So now we're going to take a closer look, and we just saw the entrance, and now we walk in. So this is just part of this grotto when they first came here, and this is where they eat and cook. You can see we have a big pot here, and from the dark color you can see how they use the fire to cook, and this is caused by the smoke. So what are those rocks? So this is a wall, artificial wall made of bricks, and that was built by those ancient workers. So we didn't change it. So right inside is our
小心一些。
bookshelf.
动物确实
Watch your head.
啊，进来好了。
So the entrance looks pretty narrow and small, but when we get inside, it's truly spacious. On June 23rd, 1939, the headmaster of a university came here and opened the box. He took out the book and said that it was too humid. And he offered two suggestions. The first is to
稍等一下，
deploy a
把镜头转过来。这是当时的存书的这个架子。
So he came up with two proposals. The first is to deploy a shelf so that we
先
can
生当时是提出了一
elevate
些
the
什么样的要求？
books to a higher level. So what the other proposals, he said. So he said we need to have a roof. And this way the dews they can fall on the roof and then they will flow to somewhere else so that we can reduce the humidity. And now you can see we also built this platform and we can put the books on this platform. So it's elevated from the ground and we can deploy some ashes and charcoals on the ground. And also take a look at the three sides of the walls. The one on the right in front of us as well as on our left. And he said that we need to attach a wooden layer just to keep off the humidity. And at the backside, we need to dig another hole. So this is for ventilation. So in a day, we can open the hole just for ventilation purposes, so the air can flow in and flow out. So this little hole here was dug manually. You can take a look at this wooden bar in it. So this, I believe, was a very important proposal, because when we just enter this grotto, it feels very fresh and very cool. So this is just one cave. So take a look at this limestone. Because of those limestone, we have those dews dropped from the pointed stones and rocks. So Mr. Zheng came forward with the two proposals to solve the issue of humidity. Another proposal was related to the shelves. And you can see that between the different wooden boxes, there is the gap, and this is also for air circulation purposes. And he also said that we need to change the order of the wooden boxes, and we put the bottom layer to the top every once in a while, and this is also very good for the preservation of the books. In autumn, the weather in Guiyang is relatively dry, so autumn is the season for us to dry the books. We have actually arranged a team to take in charge of this work. As Mr. Liang was talking earlier, that they actually worked out the regulation containing 11 points for the drawing of the books. And you can see that the ancient intellectuals living decades ago, they were following very scientific methods in preserving this collection of books.
好，廖老师刚才提到了我们的晒书11条。那么这11条大概是
So,
些
Mr.
什么内容？
Liao, you talked about these procedures of drying the books, and can tell us more. So, at the time, it was
为什么只有3到
mentioned
4
that we have to ensure 3 to 4 hours of exposure to the sunshine. So why we have 11 points of rules for the book drawing? Because number one, we have to move the books to a place with sunshine. And inside the box, there is a very thick cloth covering the books, and we have to uncover that. And also, we have to take out the books one by one and open the books. So this is a huge workload, and we cannot expose the books under the sunshine for too many hours, because if it is exposed to the sunshine for too long, the pages would curl, and we don't have. And also, we don't have much space for the book drawing. So at the time, we had 2 volunteers and also a soldier guard and a staff from the library called Chang Yuqing. So that is the only manpower they have, and they can only take out 3 hours every day for the book drawing process. So the book drawing process was very crucial, because they have to register and document the whole process. And when a wooden box is moved to this open area, it has to be documented. When a wooden box is open, it has to be documented. And when a book is dried under the sunshine, it has to be documented. So each and every book. And they have to double check the quantity of the books and to make sure that they are consistent. And then they have to seal the box with stamped paper. So this is just for management. So the proposals made by Professor Zheng were very scientific, and they were crucial to the full and perfect preservation of the books. Because Professor Zheng was also a meteorologist, he was very careful and meticulous with the protection of the books. And Zhu Kezhen, he was paying a lot of attention. And each time he comes to Guiyang, for example, when he travels from Zunyi to Guiyang, he would personally ask the situation of the books. I mentioned we had a team of 4 to 5 people. We have 2 volunteers, a guard, we have a library staff. And thanks to their collective efforts, they have been staying here for 4 years just to protect the book and dry the book every day. An entire process was 5 years and 8 months, and thanks to their efforts, those books were very well preserved. And in 1944, when the Japanese were here, in order to ensure the safety and security of the books were transferred to a different place. On December 8th, 1944, it was transferred to Chongqing from Guiyang. So that is another relocation of the books. As we have learned earlier, when it was in Guiyang, and there was a small pity for the cultural circle of Guiyang. And what is that pity? Can you tell us? So when a book was here, Guiyang wanted to make a hand copy, because Guiyang at the time was lagging behind in terms of culture, but we do have a lot of intellectuals, and we want to dramatically improve our culture, and it was a rare opportunity that the collections of the archives were here, and then the presidents of Guiyang University proposed that we have to copy one with our hands, but because we were at war and we didn't have the energy and efforts, but despite that, we managed to submit the report to the higher level of the government. But when we were right in the process of hand copying the book, the war, the devastation of Guiyang broke out. But when we were preserving this book, one student was very insistent. He came here every day and he copied the book in its entirety. So as Mr. Liao mentioned, that the conditions were not sufficient. So the official hand copying task didn't complete because Guiyang at the time was the backyard of the great battle against Japanese aggression, and the people of Guiyang and Guizhou province tried their very best to protect the books. Apart from the Windland Pavilion book, some of the treasures of Summer Palace were also well preserved in another grotto in Guiyang before relocated to somewhere else. Talents from Zhejiang University came to Guiyang to set up training centers. A huge number of talents. They came to Guiyang. They were given strong support by people of all societies, all walks of society in Guiyang. And I heard that the pity has been recovered. And the film copied version is now kept in Guiyang. So President Zhang Ting had copied 103 books. Altogether, we have more than 1,800 books, and that is the full collection of the national treasure. So these 18,000 books, they are stored at the second floor of the Windland Academy. And then the film copied version, the 1,500 books, the 1,559 books, they are well preserved at the second floor of the Windland Academy of Guiyang. For this set of books is the only well-preserved collection of archives from China. You said it very well. Although Guizhou was lagging behind in terms of culture, there were a lot of cultural intellectuals. And there was also a strong ambition to preserve the culture and preserve the national treasure of literatures. And there was the great desire of the locals to preserve a copy. And Mr. Liao has given us a full account of how the books were well preserved here for 5 years and 8 months. If we add the period when the books were preserved in the downtown area of Guiyang, and then it's 6 years and 8 months. I have to say some words about the local residents here. At the time, we had to transfer the books from the downtown center to this place, and the local residents, we carried the books, we walked the mountainous road with our bare shoulders and bare hands. It was quite difficult to carry all the books here, and it was even more challenging to carry them down the slopes of the mountains. And one party member spent the most days here. In his diary, he said that the Guiyang people, and they were very hardworking, and they never asked for pays, and each and every day they are soaked wet with sweat. And also Yang Yuqing, the library staff, He stayed here for 5 years and 8 months, and truly it was remarkable because it's far away from the downtown area at the time, and it's a very challenging trip, and they endured much hardships at the time, and they couldn't even guarantee 3 meals a day. But they made great sacrifices just for the preservation of the national treasure. You said it very well, and a lot of our ancestors, and they made enormous sacrifice just to preserve the books. And you said it that in 1944, on December the 8th, it was relocated to a different place. So how did the copied version eventually come back to Guiyang? Well, as I mentioned that on December the 6th, 1944, we started to relocate this to Wei Qingmen of Guiyang. We spent 2 days, and then we loaded them on a truck, altogether 6 trucks, and they were then transferred to Chongqing. And after the victory of the anti-Japanese aggression war, the books had to be restored or kept somewhere, and Chongqing expressed our desire to keep the books. And Zhang Chongxiang said that when the books was hand copied, it was using the donated money from the intellectuals of Zhejiang. So that is why the books made a complete return to Zhejiang province. And there is also a complete version of these books, well restored, well stored, and kept in the basement of the Zhejiang Provincial Library. And President Zhang Ting expressed his strong desire to also keep this collection of the books. We were talking about this 103 books because the Guiyang people made a great contribution in preserving the books. So that is why we managed to return some of the books. So we have to thank the intellectuals in Guizhou, and then it was because of your efforts that we managed to preserve this national treasure, and this is part of the culture recorded by those books. We are getting to the very end of this live stream program, and I would like to once again reiterate that through this extraordinary journey, we can see, number one, the Japanese aggression was not just aimed at taking our land, it's aimed at conquering our mind, taking control of our literature and culture and books. And we have to thank our heroes. It was exactly because of their sacrifice that we could preserve these books, and that is why we are here today. And this is the spirit of fighting the Japanese aggression. And this is the end of today's program. Thank you very much for watching.
央视新闻的网友，大家上午好。我现在呢所在的位置呢是在吉林省
Good morning.
磐石市
Right now,
红石喇子
I'm
抗
at
日
the
祭祀
Panshi
的所在。那么今天
city,
呢是一个特殊的日子，
红石喇子 site for the
在这个特殊的日子呢，我们是再次来到了
for the
吉林
League
磐石
against Japanese aggression in Jilin province. So today is a special day. It's the 77th anniversary of Japan's unconditional surrender. And today we have made a comeback to this relic site, and we're gonna bring you closer to the story of the anti-Japanese war fought here locally. I have a guest here today who is
来给我们
孟庆旭。
打一个招呼。大家好。
So say
那我
hello
们
to our
梦队将一
viewers.
起呢，从山下
Good morning.
我们所发现的地印子开始探访，一直到山上来了解呢，敬
So
礼
today
将
we're
军他们
gonna
所在的这个抗联的队伍，在这里是
cover
如何开
this
展
relic
武装
site
斗争
from the
和
foot of the
相应的
mountain,
这个生
and
活的
then
计
we're
划。
gonna
好，我们现在先
climb
先
up to see
给
how
我们
Yang
先
Jingyu
介绍一下
fought
这
the
个
anti-Japanese aggression war here in this part of the country.
经过这个
So tell us the archaeological findings here. So we have been doing research here for 2 years. And so this is the relic site for the League Against Japanese Aggression. And traditionally we believe it was only in Bajago, but with our research, we found out that it's not just there, and there are archaeological sites both in the north and in the southern slopes of the wall, in the southern slopes of the mountain, and we have identified more than 2,600 sites of the League. And this year we have selected this part of the mountain to discover more relics about this part of the history. So this is the entrance of this lake, and you can see our archaeological workers, digging the soil by hand, discovering more relics about this important piece of history. So now we are gonna continue walking, and you can see that our staff, they are cleaning the soil. And this is a wall trench. You can see that it's basically well preserved because it was a sunken ground, and because of the damp weather, you can see there are some red-colored soil, and that was caused by burning the soil in the past. So this is where the local soldiers fought the Japanese decades ago. So there are a lot of similar relics found in other parts of the world, and this is like a trench, and this is just for reconnaissance and guarding purposes. And this is a narrow space, and this is not conducive for the living of a lot of soldiers. So this is just like a guard post. Let me have a word with our team members. Hi, may I ask you, so what you're doing, is that a technical digging? Yes, we are getting down to the bottom layer of the trench, and we are now identifying the different boundaries on different sides. Well, it has been raining over the past few days, and does that make it more difficult? Yes, we can tell that by the humidity of the soil. It's making our work more difficult. Sometimes we will have to wait till it
好，那
dries.
我们刚才看到的这个地印子呢，既然梦队跟我们介绍，它主要是做岗哨的，
Thank you
就是
very
说
much.
一旦有一些情
As
况的
introduced
话，
by
就是可以及时的来发现，是吧？
Our
这个
technician
我们
here,
现在发现
and
这个
this
地
was
印
used
子呢，它
as
是
the
位于这
trench in the
个
past.
小崖沟区域内主要居住区的边缘，也就是它的外侧，它是用来为
So
内部的
because
居住区提
we are
供
now
警戒
at
的。
the
一会儿我们可以看一
outskirt
下内部的居
area
住区，对于内部的
of
这个居
the
住区域，我们
city,
今年也
and
做了
this
这个
is
考古发掘。
like
我们
the
可以看一下
guarding line of the city in the
其实我
past.
们能感觉出来，就是整个的这个山路还是不是很好走的，所以其实可以想象当时这个
So
抗联
it's
的这
not
个战士
easy
的这个生
walking
活
on
条
these
件是很艰
mountain
苦的。
slopes,
是的，
and
整
you
个
could
当时
imagine how hard
抗联
life
是
was for
所
those
选的这个山
soldiers
区，作为这个
in
根据地
the
就是
in the
利用
league.
当时的这个不变的地理条件来
Yes,
符合这
life
个
was
日本
hard,
帝国主义
but they have
进
to they had
攻，
to
然后
use
便于
these
这个抗联的这
unfavorable
个
conditions to fan off
现在
the
咱们展
Japanese
示的
aggression, and this is also a very
现
good
在我
place
们看
for
到的是我们
hiding.
已经清理完的一座房址，这是整个这个 红石喇子遗址小窑沟区域内的这个居
So
住
this
区。
is one little
这个编
cottage
号是
that
1
we
号房
have
子。
identified,
对。
and it's the living area of the War League. So this is
对。
cottage
这类
number
大型
one.
房子呢，
So it
是
was
当
the
时
number one
我
cottage
说的大型
in
呢，
the
是相当于
league.
低音的那个小型来说的，实际上它的面积也不是大，不是特别大。这种
So
房子
this
呢
is
是当时用于主要是用
relatively
于这个
larger,
居住
of
用
course,
的。
than the
我们
trench,
现
but
在
it's
看到
not
的
very
房子呢
big, and you
是
can
石
take
头
a
垒
look at
砌
the
的
foundation,
墙
and
体，
this is just for living purposes.
然后上面的墙体呢应该
And
是
you
木
can
头结
see
构的，
the
然后木头经过这个
foundation of the wall, and
日晒
the
已经
roof,
腐朽掉了，然后
we
现在已经
believe
封
it
着
was
这个
made by
这个墙体了。
wood,
然后我
and
们能
because
看到
of
这个内部啊，尤其是
the
西侧，
erosion,
是有一层这个
it
红色的
disappeared
红烧土
already.
的。因为当时呢，
To
根据
the
文
west,
献
you
记载
can
和
see
当时
this
当年康养老战
red-colored
士的这个口
soil,
记载，他们
and
在
that
因为
is
这个山区啊，它这
oftentimes
个非常
caused
潮
by
湿，雨水
burning.
非常多。
According
防潮，
to
在修建
the
房子之前呢，
oral
它在底部要
recounts
铺一
of
层
some
这
of
个
the
红
old
烧土和这
soldiers,
个炭
and they
灰
say
用来
that
防
they
潮。所
had
以说
to
我们看到这
lay
个西
a
部，由于
layer
这
of
个我
charcoal
们清理的
and
时候，就是
burnt
稍微
soil
这
on the
个
ground just
过了
to
一点儿，然后就
keep
把底
off
部
the
的这个
humidity.
铺垫层露出来了。从这面这个剖面上，我们也能看出来，在整个这个
So
墙体
we
下边
dug the
都是有一
ground
层炭
and
灰
we
红烧土。
exposed this red layer of soil, and you can see this layer of
那
charcoal
我也
and
介
the
绍
red
了这个
color soil.
炭灰和这个叫
红烧土。
红绳，
对。
大家通过镜头其实能够
So
看
now
到
we
现
can
在呢，就是
see from our camera this red colored
没有了，但是在这个
soil
石
layer,
头这属于就是相当于我们的地基呗，还是能够清晰可见
and
这
the
样的一
woods
个居住的一个
are
环境。
definitely gone after
那整个
70,
这
80
个
years.
发掘这样的一
But
个
still
方
from
式
the
吧，是
foundation of this cottage, you
很
could
明显
see
就能看到
what
它
was
是
the living
发掘的
conditions
时候有
like
一些
for those
残留。
soldiers
像
of
这
the
这种房
anti-Japanese
子呢，在我们
coalition.
调查的时候就已经
So
确
how
认了
difficult
基
it
本
is
它是一
to
个房址。然后我们通过这个发掘，要把
identify
它这个
such a
房子的
place.
墙体啊，或者是
So
门道
we
啊、
know
火炕啊这些
the
东西全部
place
的
in
清理
general,
出
but
来，
we
并
have
不
to
是所有的
identify
房
the
址
different
都能够把这些迹象清理出来。
details and the specific
特别清
locations
晰
of some of the functions.
对，这个是相对清晰的。它这个我们
So this
完
one
全
is
可以给它认定，但这
relatively
个这个房址
well
由西
defined.
部
You
的
can
我
see
说
we
清理红烧土出来的
identified
它的
the
西墙，我们
wall
彻底
to
破
the
坏了。
south
所以
and
说
then
它
to
的
the
西
north, 侧
我们没有看到它这个西侧
and
的
we
一个
couldn't
小
find
只
the
能是根据它
wall
北墙和
on
南
the
墙的一个
west,
走向，大致卡一下西墙的
and
位置。
then we can
那也就是说
very
在
roughly
这个
estimate the
位置是
location
北墙，那
by the
大概
northern wall and
大
by
小
the
是这样的一个区域是吗？
eastern
大
wall.
小就是房子大概有
So
多
this is how
这
big
个房子
the
面积不
area
大，大概
was.
就是40-50平这个样子。
40-50
So this is
那
not
这个
very
在
big, and this
就
is
是
like 40 to 50 square
比
meters.
较大型的房子还是比较中型小型的规模。
So this, I
这
believe,
类
is
房
a
子
very
呢，
large
对于抗联意
archaeological
识来说，这类
finding.
房子就算是大型的了。
算是大
Well,
型。
对，
for
但是相对
the
于像我们
anti-Japanese
以前挖
coalition,
掘
this
的老
is
黑
a
河、
large
日伪时期
facility
这个建筑，在日伪
uh,
这个建筑里
compared
边，这种
to
规模的房子就算是小
the
型房子了。通知一样一对比，你
other
就可以对比
sites
出来当时
built
抗联的
by
这个环
the
境和这个日伪
invading
统
force,
治的这
it
个
was much
在
smaller.
这个经济实
So
力
from
上的一个
this,
差
you
别。
can draw the
抗联住
comparison
这么大的
between
房子就算是大型
the
房子了，
two
这种
sides in
这
terms
种
of
房子放在日
economic
伪那边就是
strength.
小型房。
So this is the anti-Japanese coalition, and they live in small cottages, small dormitories.
对，
But those
一切为了
invading force from Japan, they were living in much
继续
bigger
通过这个
houses.
行进的过程当中往上来走。
All right,
您这
let's
个能不能给
continue.
我们介绍一下，就是在咱们小姚家沟的这个区域，今年的这个整体
In
的一些
Yaoja
收获
Valley
和进展。
area,
今年呢，通过
what
我们对小
archaeological
窑沟
progress
区
are
域
you
的这个
making
系
so
统的这
far?
个考古工作，我们基
Well,
本都
this
去
year
了
we
小
have been
窑沟内
focusing on this
不同遗迹
systemic
的这个布局和
archaeological
公
research in this
首先呢，进入小窑沟，
valley,
我们
and
可以
we
看到它是有
found
低
the
音的，
different
作为这个
functional
往上
zones
警戒哨的。
entering into
从
this
低音
part.
的再往里，
We
它
have
就是
the
这
guarding
个大型房
posts
址，
and the
然后用于
trenches,
这个居住，然
and
后再
then
往
we
前，它就是大
walk
型的
further
平台，用于
in.
训练和集
We
会。
have some
然后再顺着这个平
dormitories,
台再
and
往
you
上
saw
接近
this
山顶，就会有
cottage,
很
a
多的
relic
这
site,
种
and
办
then
公室，
we would
它
have a
形成
very
一
large
个有机的一个整体。
flat
先
ground. This is
警戒哨
for the
先发现
rehearsal
的，
and training
然后
of the
整个居住区
soldiers.
内 内的这个抗联
And
战
then
士
if we
就
go
开始向
further
上
up,
到大型公
we
园进
can
行集合，
see more
然后商讨
facilities.
对策。是这个
So you
就
can
地这个
imagine
抗击
what
还
was
是转
the
移。如果就地抗击的
battalion
话，
like.
就可以再向上
at the entrance, we have these guarding posts and trenches, and then we have dormitories, and we have coalition cottages, and then we have a training place, and then they have defense facilities at the top. If they lose the war or the battle, and they can very quickly transfer to other places. So they are making a very best use of this landscape of the mountain. So this is quite different from my impression of the anti-Japanese coalition. And I remember, in my impression, they were fighting a guerrilla war. But right now, you're showing me this fortitude that they held. Well, we were on top of other discovery works, and we barely found any life-related facilities. But right now, we have found a lot. Now, this one is a very representative one. For example, this is an ancient house, and this is the doorway. And now we have entered the house, and this is actually a stove. You can imagine there was a big pot sitting on it in the past, and this is connected to a big bed, and there's another bed on this side. So you could imagine this place could hold 10 people at the time. So this is like a dormitory house. And on this side, I can see there are 2 more pots and 2 more beds, and this is just for cooking and for sleeping. Yes, and they made very careful use of the space inside the cottage. All right, I will bring our camera closer, and this is the ancient stove. You can see this is where they put the wood in, and they light up the wood fire, and there was a pot sitting on it. So when they are cooking, you can see the fire tunnel is connected to beneath the bed, and they can also warm the bed. So this is another house. Yes, this is the southern bed, and that bed over there is in the north. And you can see this is the indoor facility. And what is this one? This is a shovel that we excavated. We have many different tools excavated, and those were either for defense or for agricultural activities. And so we found out that they did not just fight against the Japanese, and they also organized agricultural activities. So this tells us this is a very fixed and permanent base fighting the Japanese aggression. So this one is a tapered end from a shovel, and this shows that the soldiers of the anti-Japanese coalition, they were also engaged in agricultural activities. And Yang Jingyu built this base to fight the Japanese and also to engage in agricultural farming, just so that they could feed themselves and also provide logistic support to the war against the Japanese. And we have 2 more team members. Dig in the soil and let's have a word with them. So can you tell me what you're doing right now? So we are excavating an indoor cellar. And we have found a life-related utensil. So what is this one? By our rough estimate, and this is a spoon. Well, can you take this out? Well, it's very hard.
先清理，
对
不能直接的拿出来。
清理我们已经拍照。
We'd have to clean the surrounding
我
area,
们现在通过镜
and
头
then we
其
take
实
some
可以
photos,
看
and
到
only
这是
after
已经发
that
掘出来了一个
are we able
这应该是
to
大半部分
take
都已
this
经
out.
是在
And
地表
from
之
the
之外
footage,
了。
I
这
think you
个
can
我
see
能看到这个大概的这个圆形的
what
造
they
型。
have just
对。
discovered,
它当时
and
应该
this
是
is
一
a
个铁圈儿的一个造类的一个形状，然后下边有两
live-related
个
utensil, and
已经崩坏了的两道脊，然后它这
this
个
is
造类
just
可能是
a
竹的，或者
griddle
是绳的，或者是更细的这个铁丝
or a
做成的，但
sifter.
是现在
It
大部
might
分已经
be
腐朽掉了，现在
made
只剩
of
下它外边的一个块儿。
iron cables,
我们镜头推进一下，然后
but we couldn't tell.
考古队员
But we can still saw the frames.
现在看到它的这个轮廓是一个圆形的。
So you can see this is a round sifter.
天气还是比较湿润，下雨比较多，对于考古的这种发掘工作是不是也带来一定不利的影响？
对，尤
It's
其
quite
是在
humid
这
these
个
days because
山
of the
区
rain.
山区这个潜水
Does
位
that make
非
your
常
work
非常的
difficult?
低。如果是这个雨
Yes,
比较大的
because
情
we
况下，我
are
们不
in
能
a
把
mountainous
积水
area,
然后
and
它这
it
个
just
泥土
rained a
会非
couple
常
of
严
days
重，
ago,
然后不利于我们进行这个发掘。
and
你
this
像
is
我们这个
making
发掘
the
手掌上会
soil
沾出来
very
的泥土比较
muddy,
难以清理。第二个就是
and we
这个
can get a lot of
恶劣
mud
环境对于我
stuck on
们
our
生活的遗
hands.
物，尤其是铁器，它会加
Also,
重加快
this
它的
unstable
这个
environment
修
is
复。
very
所以
bad
说
for
我们
the
在这个发
corrosion
掘的
of
过程
some
中
of the
要一个是
utensils
加快发掘，
buried
采用各种方法，
underground. So
尽
we
快地
have
把这些
to
遗物这个清理。
expedite
第
our
二个就是要
efforts
加
to
快我
very
们这个
quickly
保
take
护
out
工
the
作，尤其是现
utensil.
场出土文物的保护工作，特别是
And we also need
地质
to
这类
bring them under quick
好，那我们让
preservation
考古队员先继续在这里进行发掘，我们待会儿可以
All
再来
right
看看。我们现在呢，再继续往上走。
Thank you very
刚刚
much.
说咱们这个
We may come back later.
就是刚才下面
Let's
第一
keep
个
walking.
岗哨
And you just mentioned that
我理解的就是生活
at
区
the
再往上
lower
再往看一下上面
level, it's for the guarding posts as well
我们
as
现在
the
呢
dormitory.
看到的这
So
个
what's above there?
区域的话呢，就是今年的第二个发掘的这个平台。刚才通过孟队
So
介
this
绍呢，
is
这个
their
平台呢，其实
second
主要就是开展军事训练。
Flat ground that they
用途。
discovered, and according
这个
to
应该是
Mr.
当
Meng's
时用于
introduction,
这
this
个
was
集
used
合
for
训练
military
开
trainings
展
at the
的一些
time.
公共活动。
So this is
使用这
where
个大
the
型的
soldiers
这种
assembled
平台的话
and
其实
engaged in
也是主
some
要保障日常
public
的用途
activities.
就是在打仗方面的话，它可能没有什么太大的
So this
作
is
用。
just for
在打
day-to-day
仗的时候，它就是提供一个前期这个
activities.
集
And
合
I
整
believe
整
that during the
整编队伍的一
battle
个作用
time
然后在这里集合整编队伍之后，他把队伍
it
拉
didn't
到更上
quite
面去
have
让
any
在
functions.
上面有这个
Well,
战争
when
模
there
式
was the
那
battle,
里
and
就
this
是
is
这个
where the
这
soldiers
个
could
这种
quickly
应该是
assemble
用来
and they
作为
can
一个
give
战前集
orders
合
to the
或者
soldiers,
是这
for
个
example,
战
to
前开
move
这个
back
预备会的
to
这个
higher
场所
grounds.
像这种平台呢，我
And
们在
this
其
is
他购物
also
里也
a place
发
where
现
they
有这
organize
些
those
基本的
prep
这个
meetings.
就是山口。有
And
这
we
个
have
整哨
identified
然后
similar
上
facilities
次上
at
面就是
other
上
mountains, and we
然后
have,
是
for
山
example,
口
at
就
the
是这个
foot of the
基
mountain,
本
we
的
have
这
the
个然后
garrison
唯一不
post
同
or
的就是八
guarding
家沟
post,
八家
and
沟的
then
这
a
个格
couple
局
of
与其他这
trenches,
个
then
沟谷
some
内的格局
dormitory
不一样，
buildings,
因为八家沟
then
呢有
a
这个文献明确记
flat
载，里边
ground
有这
for
个民
military
医
training
院，有这个
purposes.
磐石中心县委等
But
等行政
Bajago
机
is
构，
quite
所以说
different.
八家沟
It's
内的
much
这个
bigger. It has, for
整
example,
体
the ancient
整体
committee
上它这个布局是不同的，它
for
那
the
面更
county
倾向
and
于这个
also
行政。
the county level government.
对，对，
So
它更功能
Anshango was
更
just
多
for
一些。然
administrative
后这面呢，
purposes.
主要
It
就是像
features
其他沟
more
谷呢，主要就是
functions.
生产。
And this one here
其实我们通过刚才这个
is
简短的介
supporting
绍呢，我们
the
是从下面的
day-to-day
一页
agricultural
上到这个
production,
方
the
式生活区，再
day-to-day
到这个
life
训
of
练
the
的平台
soldiers, as
我
well
们
as
大致
the
呢就是可以了解
battleground.
将军领导的
So
这个
from
抗日
this
战
we
士的
can
生
see
活和这个
the
斗
young
争的
Jingwu
这样的一个布
as
局
a
和这样
great
的一
hero
个设计。
who led the
下面呢，在
anti-Japanese
山
coalition in
下比较
northeastern
矮
part
的
of
区域呢，
China.
主要是为来做岗哨，然后能够发
So
现
at
敌
the
人，
lower
及时进
ground,
行
they
报
have
信。
garrison
然后
posts
再到
and
往上呢
guarding
是非常
trenches,
艰
and
苦
they
的。刚才
can
我们通过镜头也看
identify
到了，其
the
实是
enemy
一
soldiers,
个
and they
南
can
北的
quickly
这个
transmit
都
the
有
signal
靠和
back
道的
top
这样
to
一个
the
综合的一个防止。
center of the base, and we have seen some of the ancient facilities, the dormitories, as well as the indoor facilities with the beds and the pots for cooking and sleeping purposes. And also we saw some flat grounds for military trainings and for assembly, and we wouldn't have time to go further up. But as told earlier, and there are more facilities along the landscape. Yes, and this is also showing the wisdom of the anti-Japanese coalition. They actually formed all the different parts together to integrate their activities of living and agricultural production as well as military actions. So let me go back to where we were just now, and let's show you in a very integrated manner what we have found so far. So can you tell us some of the major discoveries so far? Well, this year we have been focusing on more than 1,000 square meters, and we have covered more than 700 square meters. So far, we have excavated 400 pieces of artifacts. Most of them are related to our ancient life, for example, some pottery parts and pieces. And you can see that those are very rough utensils, for example, very rough chinaware and pottery pieces, and it's quite different from those delicate chinaware identified or discovered from the airport area, which was then taken by the Japanese soldiers. And from this comparison, you could see that the invading force, they were living a much better life than those anti-coalition soldiers. So from today's program, I think you can see what was like in the past. And we are having a baptize here through this trip, and we learn how hard those soldiers were leading a life and engaging in their defense activities, and they were also engaged in agricultural production just to provide logistics support to those soldiers fighting in the front line. So we just traveled this journey again, just to give you a better picture what was it like to fight the Japanese soldiers 80 years ago. So the modern dwellers wouldn't choose here to live our life because it's very difficult. And now we just walk down the slope, and this is a little cottage. So this is just one of our temporary sites. So it's a temporary building that we build up for support purposes. Can we turn on the light?
其实我们现在呢看到的这个文物呢，其实还是比较丰富的。现在是都陈列在这个台子上。
So right now you can see a lot of
大概
objects
是有4层的这个架子，现在是
exhibited
展
on
示
those
在
shelves.
这个
It's a
2层。
4-level
我们看到的，
shelf.
我们介绍一下，我看这里
And
的还
on
是
the
非常
second
丰
floor,
富的。
you
我们
can
也通过镜
on
头
the second level
看一
you
下。
can see a lot of objects. And can you give us some introduction? So these are some agricultural tools, some shovels, and tools, and the sickles, scissors, and some corns. And from the corns you can tell the time, and there were the copper corns from Qing Dynasty, and also the corns used by the Manchuria government under the control of Japanese invading force. And they were very small corns, not big values, and they could circulate because not so many corns were excavated, because you can imagine they were leading a pretty hard life. So as Mr. Meng has introduced, let me draw our camera closer so you can see clearly. They are rich in varieties, and you can see how closed this utensil is. And they would indicate in this wooden board how well preserved it is, and this one is a incomplete piece. And this one is relatively complete. It's a shovel. And this one is for
然后
horse
这边呢，
riding.
我们还看到还有一
We
些
have a
小
chisel
型
here.
的一些器具。
We
这
have
个呢就
a
是开展武装斗争的这个
sickle
枪
here.
的弹壳，这个是子
So
弹头。
this,
看到这个子
I
弹头
believe,
其
is
实
the
是
magazine
武
of
器修
the
饰的。
gun, and this
因为
is
当
the
时我
bullet
们可以
tag.
看到我们这个弹壳种类也是非常多样的，说明当时抗联它
You
的
can
武
see
器
there
来
were
源也
many
是多样
different
的，
types
有
of
不同
bullets.
来源的武器，包括这种
And
制式的
then
弹药，
you
然
know
后我
that
们
the
包括建筑当中
weaponry
还出
came
土了
from
一些
many
土
different
料的这
sources
个
and channels.
枪械，
There
我
were
们俗称的这个洋炮，说明当
independently
时我们
made
抗联确实在武
powders and
器都没有
bullets.
建制化的程
They
度
were
下，
using
然后
many
进
different
行
types of
抗日斗争是非常艰
cannons.
苦的。其中我们可以看到刚才的就是
So
所谓的
it
这个
was
扎枪，当
truly
时我们抗联不光
challenging for
用
them
一个
to
武器，
launch
还有
a
相当一部分这个战士
defense
他使用
battle,
兵器作战去对抗
given the
这种
lack
主义的
of
这个飞机
weaponry.
大炮。
And many were using agricultural tools, farming tools, to fight the Japanese. And you can imagine the gap between the defense and the invading force. Some more living utensils here. And this is not quite related to Yang Jingyu's army, and this is the Battalion 31 and 30. And they were farming as well as fighting the Japanese invaders. And this is pottery. And this is some pieces of chinaware. And this is
这边还有
a
这个
porcelain
这应
piece.
该像一个碗，像罐子啊。
这
And
是一
this one
个
here is the
类似于应该
bowl.
是算是瓷罐，但是这个瓷是非常粗的。
对。
近于那个
So
近于
it's
我们
chinaware
的
actually,
钢
but
盘
it's very rough,
瓷器
very poor quality. It's just like a very rough pottery part. So all the objects that we found here indicate a very poor life. So you can see how rough the surface is. And back 80 years ago, it couldn't even compare to these very delicate utensils used by the Japanese invading force. So through this exhibition room, we gave you a general view about the important discoveries found here. You can imagine how hard it was living in the past while fighting the Japanese
其实呢，
invaders.
时间也差不多了。我们的直播呢，其实通过比较简短的一个时间呢，通过跟
It's about
孟贵
time,
的一个
and
交流和了解呢，
we
是
have
了解了东北
taken a
抗
brief
联的
tour
艰苦和不易。
under the guidance of Mr. Meng, and we saw how challenging life was in the past. And the Japanese and the anti-Japanese coalition in northeastern part of China was one very important part of the Chinese history in that period of time. And we know that in Panshi of Jilin, there was important battles took place, and there were sacrifices made, and there were a lot of soldiers who dedicated their life. And we hope that this part of the history can cheer up our